If my morality needs fear to stay awake, then it is not morality. It is compliance.
Hmm.
I have to be honest, I read that sentence maybe 3 times before I even turned the page. It just sort of stops you cold, doesn't it?
It really does. It's one of those lines that, well, it sounds simple at first, but the more you sit with it, the more uncomfortable it gets.
Yeah.
It forces you to actually ask yourself, am I actually a good person?
Yeah.
Or am I just afraid of getting in trouble?
Right. It's the difference between being law-abiding and being, fundamentally good. And that is exactly where we're going today. Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here.
We're tackling a text today that, and I'll warn you right now, it's not going to let you just stay on the surface. We're looking at a piece called The Gospel of Sacrifice.
Which is from the writings of D.L. Dantes.
Exactly. Specifically from his larger work, The Resilient Philosopher.
And we should probably clarify the mission here immediately for everyone listening.
Yeah, please do. Because with a title like Gospel, people might think we're about to launch into a Sunday sermon.
Right. Or conversely, an attack on religion.
Mm-hmm.
And Dantes is doing neither of those things. He really isn't interested in theology, and he definitely isn't telling you who to vote for.
No, not at all.
He's acting more like a mechanic looking at an engine. He wants to show you the mechanics of power. Specifically, how institutions, and that could be a government, a social movement, or, yes, a religious organization, how they use spiritual language to demand obedience.
And in the worst cases, to justify violence.
Exactly.
We're looking at the blueprint, basically. How does a private, beautiful thing like faith get turned into what Dantes calls a public machine? And I have to say, going through the source material, it felt a little bit like learning how a magic trick works.
Oh, for sure.
Once you see the wires, you really can't unsee them.
And that is exactly the hope. The goal of this deep dive is to give you, the listener, the lenses to spot these patterns out in the wild. Because once you understand how sacrifice is used as a shortcut for power, it entirely changes how you hear the evening news. It changes how you process a political speech. Honestly, it might even change how you look at your corporate job or your boss.
So let's get right into the machinery. Dante starts with this really fundamental distinction. He separates faith from religion as identity.
Yes.
Now, usually in everyday conversation, we use those words completely interchangeably, but he says they are total opposites.
He does. And the distinction he makes is highly directional. Dantes argues that faith is a path inward. It's you alone wrestling with your own conscience, your place in the universe, your own shortcomings. It's deeply vulnerable.
Right.
But religion as identity, that is a weapon pointing outward.
Okay, but let me just play devil's advocate here for a second. Is identity inherently a bad thing? I mean, being a fan of a sports team is an identity. Being a citizen of a country is an identity. We need to belong to things, don't we?
Absolutely we do. Humans are tribal creatures by nature.
Yeah.
We crave belonging. And Dantes isn't saying that belonging itself is bad.
Right.
What he's saying is that when belief hardens into this rigid identity badge, the whole priority shifts. It stops being about, what is actually true or how do I become a better person? And it becomes entirely about boundary maintenance.
Ah, boundary maintenance.
Yeah, it becomes about who are we versus who are they.
And that is exactly where things get dangerous. He outlines this specific progression that I found really helpful and honestly a little terrifying. It's a 3-step formula. He says belief becomes identity. Identity becomes permission. And permission becomes violence.
Is that middle step, the permission part, that we so often miss in these cultural conversations. We understand identity, like I am part of this group, and we obviously see the violence at the end of the line. But how do we get from A to C?
Right, because most people aren't naturally violent. You can't just walk up to a normal person and tell them to go hurt someone. They just won't do it.
Exactly. Unless you change the rules of engagement for them. That is what permission does.
Mm-hmm.
Once your identity is firmly rooted in being, say, the chosen or the righteous or the patriots, it implicitly grants you permission to treat the outsider completely differently.
You don't have to give them the same empathy you'd give someone in your own tribe.
Exactly. It operates like a psychological off switch.
A psychological off switch. That's such a great way to put it. And this ties perfectly into what Dantes calls the paradox of conditional love.
Oh, yes.
Because institutional power structures, they always claim to offer unconditional love or belonging. It's always, come as you are, right?
Right. But Dante says if you actually look at the fine print of these groups, it's really approval with conditions.
Belonging is totally dependent on obedience.
And that creates a very high-stakes environment for the individual. If I know that my acceptance in the tribe depends entirely on me agreeing with the tribe, then asking a question isn't just, intellectual curiosity anymore.
It feels like a betrayal.
It is perceived as a threat.
It's like imagine a really exclusive country club. A country club only feels exclusive if there are people standing outside the gate who can't get in. If you just open the doors and let everyone in, the whole identity of the club completely collapses.
That is a brilliant analogy. Dantes talks heavily about this obsession with purity. Purity requires an outsider. You simply cannot be the pure ones unless you can point to someone else and say they are the impure ones.
Wow.
So the system actually needs the sinner or the traitor just as much as it needs the saint. It desperately needs someone to label as wrong so the people inside can feel right.
And that inevitably leads to control. Because to keep that distinction crystal clear, you can't tolerate any nuance. You need very simple rules. Dantes writes this one line, "Control prefers simple slogans over complex truth." Which, wow, I think I see that on bumper stickers every single day.
It is vastly easier to manage a population with a catchy slogan than it is with a nuanced debate.
Okay, so we've established how belief gets calcified into this strict us versus them identity. But the source text is called the Gospel of Sacrifice. We really need to talk about that part because this is where Dantes introduces this metaphor of the moral bridge. And honestly, this image really disturbed me.
It is absolutely meant to be disturbing.
Yeah.
What specifically stood out to you about it?
Well, he talks about how leaders use the cultural reverence we have for sacrifice, the fact that we naturally respect people who give things up for others to build a bridge. And he says they build this bridge so they can walk across it whenever they, quote, need bodies to move.
Need bodies to move.
Yeah. It sounds like logistics. Like he's talking about inventory in a warehouse, not human beings.
That is the harsh reality Dantes is trying to expose here.
Yeah.
Power structures, massive states, armies, giant organizations, they often view populations merely as resources. But you can't just tell people, hey, go die so our corporation can secure this lithium mine.
Right. Or go suffer so my political party can stay in power.
No, you would have a revolution on your hands by Tuesday. So you have to reframe the suffering. You have to actively turn the tragedy into a virtue. And this is the moral bridge. You take the very real, very painful grief of a community, the loss of a son, the loss of a family home, and you reframe it completely as sacrifice for the cause.
So death suddenly becomes purpose. Grief becomes pride.
And crucially, dissent becomes weakness. This is the emotional engine that Dantes describes. It silences argument with emotion. Think about it practically. If a country is at war and you start questioning the actual reasons for the war, the underlying economics, the political maneuvering, what is the immediate accusation thrown at you?
That you're disrespecting the troops, that you're somehow dishonoring the memory of the fallen.
Exactly. The sacrifice itself becomes the shield against any criticism. How dare you question this policy when so many brave people have died for it? It's a complete trap. Because who wants to be the person yelling at a funeral?
Nobody. It shuts you down instantly.
And that is exactly why it is so remarkably effective. Once death is established as the ultimate proof of truth, the leadership no longer needs to argue facts. They just point to the graves. But Dantes does give us a litmus test to cut through this manipulation. He says when you hear these sweeping stories of glorious sacrifice, you have to stop and ask one single question.
Who profits from the story being repeated?
Yes. And the sad truth is, the answer is almost never the family burying their loved one. The profit, whether that's political capital, territory, or just pure money, usually goes to the people who are sitting safely in offices nowhere near the front lines.
This feels like the absolute perfect pivot to the biggest institution of them all, the state. Because Dantes does not pull any punches here. He says the state needs taxes, it needs legitimacy, but in times of crisis, it needs blood.
It needs human fuel to run the machine. And this is where we see the holy language come in. Even in completely secular nations, observe how the language shifts dramatically when a war starts. It goes from dry and bureaucratic to almost biblical overnight.
We suddenly stop talking about national interests and start talking about evil.
Yes. We hear phrases like crusades, infinite justice, axis of evil. Dantes argues that leaders dress up standard political or economic goals in religious clothing because it provides moral authorization. If I kill my neighbor just for their land, I'm a savage. If I kill them to eradicate evil, well, then I'm a warrior of light.
It's the martyr language. And it's incredibly seductive, isn't it? Because it gives your personal suffering meaning. If I'm just a pawn in some geopolitical chess game, that's incredibly depressing. But if I'm a martyr, that's eternal.
It heavily appeals to our deepest human desire for significance. But Dantes warns that this is what he calls a devil shortcut.
Oh, I love this part. The devil narrative. Break this down for us, because I think I've actually been guilty of using this mental shortcut myself in daily life.
We all have. It's human nature. The devil narrative is basically a built-in mechanism for dodging responsibility. Essentially, you credit all the good outcomes upward to God, to the visionary leader, to the great cause. But you aggressively blame all the bad outcomes downward to the devil, to the enemy, to the internal saboteur.
So it's like saying, we won the client contract because our team is blessed and righteous, but we missed the project deadline entirely because those other guys undermined us.
Exactly. And think about what that does to the person in the middle, the regular citizen or employee. It trains them to entirely externalize accountability. I didn't do that bad thing. The devil tempted me. Or I had to do something cruel. The enemy forced my hand.
It's a convenient way to feel totally righteous, even while you're actively doing something terrible.
It shrinks the conscience. A society that relies on the devil narrative loses the fundamental ability to say, I made a mistake. And as Dantes points out, once a group loses the ability to own its mistakes, it is capable of almost anything.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty dark picture of the trap here, but I want to push back on Dantes a bit, just to explore this fully. We are getting into the section on ethics now, specifically where he talks about atheism or secular ethics. Because the common argument, and I hear this all the time out in the world, is that society actually needs that fear.
Right.
The idea is, if people don't believe in a God who actively punishes them, or a literal hell that waits for them, why wouldn't they just rob their neighbors and run wild? Isn't fear the only thing actually keeping the lights on in civilization?
That is the classic, if there is no sheriff, there is no law argument. And Dantes tackles this head-on by distinguishing between two very different concepts, compliance and discipline.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Compliance is exactly what you were describing. It is simply behavior modification based purely on fear. I won't hit you because I don't want to go to jail. Or I won't steal from you because I don't want to go to hell. Dantes forcefully argues that isn't morality at all. That is just basic self-preservation. You aren't actually caring about the other person in that scenario. You're only caring about your own skin.
Okay, so then what is discipline in his view?
Discipline, or what he later links to the concept of stewardship, is treating life as precious, precisely because it is finite. It's the secular or atheist argument that says, this life is the only one I have and it's the only one you have. Therefore, violating your life is the ultimate crime because I can't give it back to you.
So I treat you well not because I'm afraid of a ghost watching me, but because I deeply respect the sheer fragility of your existence.
Exactly. It completely shifts the moral focus from obeying the power to protecting the person. And Dante suggests a surveillance test to see which one of these you're actually operating on.
Which is, what kind of person do I become when no one is policing me?
That is the ultimate question. If your ethics collapse the very moment the security camera is turned off, or the moment you think God isn't watching, then you never actually had ethics. You just had obedience. Dantes argues that real morality survives perfectly well without a throne to watch it. It relies on a conscience that, as he beautifully puts it, refuses to go to sleep.
A conscience that refuses to go to sleep. That's a really high bar. So let's talk about how we actually do that in practice. We spent a lot of time dissecting the problem, this weaponization of belief and identity. What is the actual solution he proposes? He calls it stewardship leadership, right?
Yes. This is the constructive, hopeful part of his philosophy. If control is fundamentally about using people, stewardship is about actively refusing to use them.
He outlines 4 pillars of stewardship. And I really want to walk through these slowly because I think these are practical tools, not just abstract theory. If you are a manager, a parent, a voter, this is basically your operational checklist.
Let's do it.
Pillar number 1, refusing to treat people as disposable, even outsiders.
This circles right back to the bodies as inventory problem we talked about earlier. Stewardship means entirely rejecting the idea that any human being is just fuel for your fire. And notice the even outsiders part. That's key. It is very easy to protect your friends. True stewardship is protecting the people who don't belong to your club.
Pillar number 2, refusing to sacralize harm.
This means we have to stop using holy or heroic language to cover up ugly realities. If a policy or an action causes human suffering, we call it suffering. We don't dress it up and call it cleansing or unnecessary sacrifice. You have to look the harm right in the eye and call it by its actual name.
No more euphemisms. I really like that. Okay, pillar number 3, separating personal devotion from institutional coercion.
This is purely about freedom. Dantes writes this incredible line, "Faith that cannot tolerate freedom is not faith. It is fear with a uniform. You can have your deep personal convictions. Those are yours to keep. But the exact moment You use the leverage of an institution, whether that's a federal law, a corporate company policy, or just intense social pressure to force those convictions onto someone else. You have officially left stewardship behind.
You're back to control. And finally, pillar number 4, measuring morality by outcomes, not slogans.
I call this the bumper sticker test.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't care what your organization's mission statement says. I don't care if your slogan's love and light. If the actual real-world outcome of your leadership is that people are left bleeding, hungry, or deeply ashamed, then your morality is actively failing. Stewardship forces you to look at the fruit, not the root.
Speaking of outcomes, Dantes brings this entire massive geopolitical concept all the way down to the family unit right at the end of the chapter. And I'm so glad he did, because it's very easy for us to sit here and point fingers at politicians or historical figures, but he explicitly talks about parenting. And this part, well, it hits incredibly close to home.
It does. It is undeniably the emotional core of the whole text. He warns that when sacrifice is held up as the absolute highest virtue in a home, it becomes shockingly easy to justify abandoning a child just for the sake of an image.
We have all seen this happen, haven't we? The family that just looks absolutely perfect on Instagram. They check all the boxes of their religious or their social community. But then one of the kids steps out of line. Maybe they come out as gay. Maybe they just decide to stop going to the family church. Or maybe they just choose a career path that the parents think is embarrassing.
And the parents completely cut them off.
And they don't call it abandonment.
No, never. They call it discipline. They call it tough love. They say they're protecting the family values. But Dantes is absolutely brutal in his assessment here. He says they are calling exile discipline, and they are calling shame love.
That's the identity versus faith thing playing out in a living room. They are desperately protecting the identity of the family over the actual living human being in the family.
Exactly. They're literally sacrificing the child to save the image. Dantes argues that true stewardship is the exact opposite of that impulse. It is protecting people when the world is eager to discard them. Even if that means your social world looks at you and says, why are you hanging out with them?
That is such a powerful, grounded definition of leadership. It's not about how many followers you have or how pure your brand is. It's about who you are actually shielding when the stones start flying.
It's about choosing to be a buffer against the machine, rather than just another cog in it.
So, we have covered a massive amount of ground here today. We started with that heavy quote about morality versus compliance. We walked all the way through how identity grants the permission for violence. We looked at the moral bridge that leaders build over human tragedy.
And we exposed the devil narrative that lets us conveniently blame our own bad behavior on phantom enemies.
And finally, we landed here on stewardship. The absolute refusal to treat people as disposable. It's a lot for anyone to process. But if the listener takes just one thing away from this deep dive, one practical tool for their daily kit, what should it be?
I think it has to be the realization that power will always try to borrow the sacred. It is quite simply the most efficient way to control a large group of people. If I can convince you that obeying me is exactly the same thing as obeying the universe, or God, or destiny, then I effectively own you.
So our best defense is skepticism.
Skepticism, yes, but also applying that internal surveillance test every single day. You have to constantly stop and ask yourself, am I doing this right now because it is actually right? Or am I just doing this because I am terrified of losing my membership card?
And always watch out for the martyr language.
Always. When anyone tells you that death or suffering is the only valid proof of devotion, just pause and ask, who profits from this story?
Dantes leaves us with a final thought in the text that I think sums all of this up perfectly. He says the danger isn't belief itself. The danger is when identity becomes permission. Quote, when that happens, the state no longer needs to convince you. It only needs to bless the sacrifice, and the blessing will do the rest.
It's a haunting warning. Don't ever let the blessing do the work of your own conscience.
Heavy stuff, but absolutely necessary stuff. Now here's a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. Based on everything we've talked about, ask yourself this. How many small sacrifices of your own voice have you already made today just to keep your own identity intact? And who exactly is blessing those small silences?
Oof. That's a question that will keep you awake.
We hope this deep dive gave you some valuable new lenses to look at the world with. Thanks for being here with us.
Take care of each other.
We'll see you next time.